I mean, my profession is a web developer, and I work for a company called Twist Bioscience. But more pertinently, perhaps to tonight's talk, this is the time of year for traveling to see Calochortus. So I've already taken a couple of field trips. One with the Calochort Society, one of the Bay Area Calochort societies, to see Calochortus in the wild. I went a couple of weeks ago down to San Luis Obispo County, which I'll talk more about later in the show. And then in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be going down to LA to do a walk to see some of the species down there, and also stopping by some of my favorite haunts between here and the LA area to see more Calochortus. So that's been the stuff I've been doing of late. Yeah, and I guess that's it. Anything else you want to know about? All right.
Oh, we would like to thank you for leading the field trip last weekend as well.
Oh yeah, I guess I should have mentioned that. Yeah. So we did have a field trip last weekend to see the Calochortus tiburonensis in Tiburon. I'll also talk more about that a little bit later. But yeah, it was a nice field trip. About 20 people showed up. Beautiful time of year for field trips.
Fabulous area too, that Ring Mountain.
Yeah, it is indeed. All right, I will go ahead and get started. So evening's talk is in three big parts. We'll talk a little bit about natural history of the Calochortus and their place in sort of the larger world of plants. Then we'll have a photo tour to look at some of the Calochortus and their habitat, and then we'll talk about growing Calochortus from a gardening perspective. All right. Start off, however, with a little bit of eye candy to get everyone refreshed. So this is beautiful Calochortus striatus. It's a federally endangered species. It only grows at seeps and springs in and around the Mojave Desert. This particular picture is from a population at the edge of an Air Force base down near Rosamond. It is a huge population, tens of thousands of plants there in a wash, but it is also a very ephemeral population. It blooms for a short time. Dry years, you don't see any activity at all. And good years, one of the years that I visited this one, for instance, there were thousands of blooms in some spots. Really, really dramatic. This is my favorite Calochortus, Calochortus fimbriatus. This one grows in Big Sur and in the hills behind Santa Barbara, sort of the coastal transverse ranges. This is the delightful and nearly ubiquitous Calochortus venustus. You'll find this almost all over the state, and it has many, many forms, which we'll see a little bit later. And this is Calochortus albus. It's one of the more common species here in the Bay Area, though this particular population is from down on the coast near San Simeon. It's very dwarfed and short and grows like right at the edge of the ocean. And in that same area also grows the cute little Calochortus clavatus recurvifolius. This is a dwarfed population right near the ocean. It has a beautiful view, and it's a very small population. I visited there earlier this year after having not been for a few years, and the bluff erosion was pretty bad. I imagine there's a loss of a good many plants to the landslides here, unfortunately. Calochortus plumeri from down in Southern California. These pictures are from Santa Monica Mountains. You've probably seen in a couple of the other images, if you've looked sharply, there are pollinators in a lot of these images. And there's another one here. Calochortus are often, riotous boudoirs of insect activity. Feeding, mating, all kinds of things. Probably also just spending the night to stay warm. Many Calochortus will close up at night and bees will sleep inside them. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the natural history of the Calochortus. Hopping over to Wikipedia, we can take a look at the larger place where monocots fit, Calochortus armonicots. So inside the larger group of plants, at the base of the angiosperms, the base of the flowering plants, we have a lot of interesting species Aquatic plants seem to play an interesting early role in the evolution of flowers. It seems to be the case that probably the first flowering plants were aquatic, though it's not a completely settled question. If we move down into the monocots themselves, interesting as well, the monocots start with two groups that are aquatic and certainly water loving, and then we can move over to the area where Liliales sits. Calochortus are inside the Liliales. And you can see these are surrounded. There's the Dioscorea, which are a sweet potato, or not a sweet potato, a yam. More specifically, sweet potatoes are morning glory relatives. The pandanus, screw pines, and some other palm-like plants that you might have seen if you've been to Hawaii or some of the other tropical areas. They're kind of a pan-global tropical species, a tropical group of plants. And then we have the Liliales that split off from a larger group, asparagus being part of those. So things like agave and asparagus are pretty close to Liliales. Um, all right, and then talking a little more about Liliales, seems to be the case looking at some global maps of the continental configurations long ago. This is about 50 million years ago, and this is probably around the time that Liliales seems to have arisen. And it seems to be the case that it arose in some mountainous areas in, sort of Proto-Asia. It was before India had collided with the Asian landmass, but there were mountains there, a variety of topographies, and so that seems to be the setting for the arising of the Liliales. Looking at the Liliales a little more closely, and this is looking at sort of the modern species that still exist today. We can see Calochortus here is traditionally looked at as being very close to a plant called Tricertus, called the toad lily. It's a somewhat popular garden plant. You find these from Japan, Eastern Asia. Um, and then moving out from there, we find a few other, common woodland plants. Scoliopas, our wonderful little lily of the redwoods, is right here, tucked in fairly close to Calochortus. And then not too far away, in a different grouping, but pretty close, are the Clintonias, which are also a Bay Area native, erythroniums, which you can find a little north of here, the typical liliums, and the fritillariums. So you can see sort of nestled in a grouping of a variety of the lily taxa. And here's a picture of some of the other liliales that Calochortus are related to. So, typical lilium, the Clintonia, the fritillarias. This is an Asian genus called Notholarian. The tulipas, the erythroniums, the prosartes and the streptopus. And then here's that toad lily I mentioned, Tricertus. So this is probably the closest relative of Calochortus. All right, so when exactly did the Calochortus arise? Well, there's been different studies and different times have come out. So we have some that are as recently as 7.3 million years ago, a range of times around 20 million years, a larger range around 50 to 60 million years. Um, the timelines are definitely variable. A recent paper that came out was about 40 million years or so. So an interesting variation in time ranges there, but it seems to be the case that Calochortus are pretty old. And that might be a good explanation for how Calochortus, which don't seem to have seeds adapted for wide dispersal, how they've managed to move around so far in North America and occupy so many habitats. Now, I did show a tree and sort of the family relationships of Calochortus. It is more complicated than that. Different research has found different, pairings. So here we can see a couple of different trees that are trying to map the family relationships here. And some Calochortus is very close to Tricertus, like this one, for instance. And in others, Calochortus is much further away from Tricertus. And it gets even more complicated than that. So different studies, different samples, different groups of plants show lots of variation, but seems to be the case, or I should say, Calochortus is firmly within the Liliales, certainly close to a lot of the woodland species like Scoliopas and Tricertus, but definitely unresolved at this point. All right. So we are lucky to be in the Bay Area. The Bay Area is the global center of diversity for Calochortus. There are a variety of geographically defined clades. This is an older tree and an older grouping. It's roughly still accurate based on some modern papers, but I just got a hold of a brand new paper that definitely um, jiggles inside the individual branches here. And there's some eye-opening, eyebrow-raising rather, results in that paper. But we'll stick with this one for now. It's an older cladogram. And so we have a Bay Area, a grouping of Bay Area plants. Many of these are fairy lanterns. They are round, downward facing flowers, but not all of them. There's a variety of interesting ones here. Tiburonensis is particularly interesting. We'll see some pictures of that in a little while. The Pacific Northwest has got another large grouping, and these also extend out into the Great Basin. There's an interesting set of what's here called the San Diego clade, but these taxa are all the way from southern Big Sur all the way down into San Diego and the Baja Peninsula. And then there's a Great Basin clade as well, a Sierra Nevada and Coast Ranges clade, southwestern California, which is a somewhat unusual name for it, but it is Southern California basically. And then there's a Central Mexican clade. I have the least experience with the Central Mexican clade because it's not very easy to drive to, first of all, and they grow on a different schedule. Most of them are summer growers rather than winter growers. All right, so here is a global map, and we can see the various clades of the Calochortus that we saw back here with a similar color coding showing the distribution. So there's a large clade down in Mexico, and then all the other species are in a somewhat cohesive geographical area in Western North America. All right. Calochortus have diversified pretty wildly. There are about 70 species in the genus, and about 45 of those are in California. Um, that is largely attributable to the variety of geological substrates. In California, there are many specialist species that exist on serpentine in different parts of the state or in other unusual soil similar to serpentine. Strange geologies breed unusual soil types, and unusual soil types breed unusual plant species and subspecies on those soil types. So here's a picture of the cedars. This is up near Cazadero, a little north of the Bay Area, near the Russian River. And this is an exposure of peridotite. So peridotite is a relative of serpentine. It's a rock from fairly deep in the Earth's crust that normally doesn't appear at the surface very frequently. And this is a large exposure. It's a couple of mountain-sized areas of this rock. And here there grows the Calochortus rachii, which is a beautiful little yellow fairy lantern. This is a shot of a serpentine hillside. So this is an image that looks very much like what you might find in Tiburon, for instance, where Tiburonensis grows. In this case, we are in San Luis Obispo, where the similarly endemic San Luis Obispo ensis grows. And right here in the lower middle of the picture is a tiny little yellow and red flower of that genus. We'll see a little more of that later. All right, and here's a shot of the striatus I mentioned earlier that grows in the Mojave Desert. This is a shot of some of the substrate near where it grows. So alkaline mud. The plants grow out into and at the edges of large muddy areas like this that catch rain during the winter and then feed the bulbs as they grow and bloom in the early spring. And then this is a shot of not so much a strange substrate, but a alpine location. This is the top of Mount Pinos down in the Transverse Ranges near the Grapevine. This is about 9,000 feet, and Calochortus invenustus, an alpine-loving Calochortus, grows here, and it basically is stemless. It looks like a morning glory. The flowers come up out of the ground and bloom immediately at ground level. And Calochortus can even be pretty tough in human environments. This is down I believe this is Idria Coalinga Road. Yeah, I think this is yeah. So it's down near Clear Creek, sort of past Pinnacles, out in the middle of nowhere, Central California. And here's the Calochortus venustus busting its way through some pavement at the edge of the street. All right. So, Calochortus have some very interesting patterns in their distribution. So here's the sort of family tree that I showed earlier, color coded for the places where these Calochortus grow. So you can see at the bottom, there's always going to be a bit of an outlier because these are the Mexican species down here. Um, but there's, a wide range of the different kinds of Calochortus, and they've managed to sort of spread into different parts of the other ranges. So even though sort of the traditional Bay Area grouping up here, other species have managed to get close to Central California, the Bay Area as well. We can see chromosome number variations. This is very important in explaining how you can travel around California and find two or three or even more species of Calochortus growing within sight of each other. Clearly, there must be barriers to them interbreeding, and so the chromosome number is probably a good one of those. We can see, as I mentioned earlier, how important serpentine tolerance has been to Calochortus and how many different taxa have evolved tolerance to serpentine, and this has frequently led to, endemic and specialized species that only grow on serpentine, though I will asterisk that point and come back to it a little bit later. And then the floral syndrome. So this is the shape of the flower. There are the fairy lanterns, which are downward pointing flowers. There are the cat's ears, which are upward facing flowers full of little trichomous hairs. There are the star tulips that are similar to the cat's ears. They don't have as many hairs, but they have nodding seed pods as opposed to upright seed pods. And then the Mariposa lilies, the largest group, they have upward facing flowers and upward seed pods. Lots of variation and a lot of reiterative variation in Calochortus. So the different plants have diversified across many different habitats, and within each of the habitats where the various groups have arrived, they've rediversified there and re-evolved fairy lantern shapes inside non-fairy lantern groupings, and they've evolved upward-facing flowers inside other groups that have nodding flowers. So lots of variation. Calochortus is still a young and diversifying genus and certainly still spreading as well. All right, Calochortus also are, important in the environment. They tend to bloom late in the spring, so a lot of other vegetation in the environment, the grass and many of the other annuals will be dry at the point at which Calochortus are blooming. And so they are popular with insects, pollinators, pollen feeders, nectar feeders, and then they also serve as sites for lots of insects to meet other insects. So you'll find, spiders there hunting for prey. You'll find other predator insects and lots of beetles and other small arthropods that are there probably to feed and to socialize and to mate. Um, this picture is a bit frozen in time, but these two bees were in frenetic motion all around the inside of this flower. I'm not sure if it was a territorial dispute or it was an attempt at mating. I don't know, but it was definitely a lot of activity. They were moving very quickly. So even though this picture only caught a moment in time, this was just like they were racing around. It was interesting. Lots and lots of small flies as well. These were some kind of gnat. I didn't get very, didn't identify the insects, but there was, a small cloud of them that were inside the flower. And just after I took the image, the wind rustled the flower and they all flew away. Lots of diversity in the various insects that you'll find here. There's a bee here. There are various beetles. There's a rove beetle. Lots and lots of different arthropods visit the flowers. Calochortus seeds are not designed for very good dispersal. There's a small grouping of the Great Plains Calochortus, monophyllus, and a few, not monophyllus, macrocarpus, and a few of the others that seem to be designed for wind dispersal. They have large, flat seeds that could be picked up by the wind and blown around. But most Calochortus, even the ones that have seeds that are certainly dislodged from their seed pods by the wind, the seeds themselves are not very, not designed for being carried in the wind very far. So it is an interesting bit of a conundrum as to exactly how Calochortus, which can manage to find themselves sprinkled wide and widely spaced habitats all across the state, manage to make it from here to there because their seeds certainly are not being carried by the wind very far in any case. This is Calochortus lechlinii. It's one of the high elevation Calochortus, but it does grow at the edge of the Great Basin, and so it seems to start to show a little bit of seed size expansion for wind dispersal. But as I mentioned, Calochortus can definitely get around. So something is helping them move. So here, for instance, is Calochortus invenustus. I mentioned it earlier. It grows in alpine areas, mostly in Southern California. But in addition to those spots, you can find it at mountaintops sprinkled all the way up to the Bay Area and even east of the East Bay here near Livermore. And in all of these cases, small outcrops at elevation, usually 4,000 feet high or higher, and no Calochortus invenustus anywhere in between. So something's taking them. Perhaps they stick to the feet of birds. That's my working theory right now. Calochortus splendens is another example, a widely distributed taxa in the state, very common in Southern California and some of the driest parts of Southern California. It also manages to find dry microclimates all the way up into Northern California, with even some historical reports of places like east of Eureka having that same species. And then Calochortus albus is another interesting example. Two large populations, one in the Sierra, one in the Coast Range, not really found much anywhere in the intervening spots. All right. So now we can start a photo tour of some of the species. This is not an exhaustive tour of the species. There are many, many photos online. These are just some of my own. So these are some images of Calochortus in my yard. I'll talk more about cultivating Calochortus later, but it is surprisingly easy. This is Calochortus aminus, a beautiful little pinky purple taxon from the Southern Sierra. This is Calochortus pulchellus. It is another endemic. It grows only immediately around Mount Diablo and a few other places. You can find it in Briones Regional Preserve, for instance, but it's basically limited to the East Bay. And yeah, a delightful little yellow fairy lantern. Um, the very similar Calochortus amabilis is one of the more common Calochortus north of the Bay Area, and it is very similar. But if you look between the two, you can see subtle differences. Amabilis is a bit squarer of a flower. Its tepals tend to be straighter and purer yellow. Pulchellus is a bit more of a globe and has a bit more curve in its tepals as well. As the Calochortus amabilis and Pulchellus both age, they can get orange. So you'll find flowers, and older flowers will have a nice orange tinge to them in various populations. This is Calochortus albus, one of the more common ones. I showed pictures of it earlier of a coastal population. This is of a more shade-loving population down on the peninsula. As you move south from the Bay Area towards Central California, close to San Luis Obispo and Cambria, the Calochortus can pick up more and more of a reddish tinge. And so this pink cast here is from a population in northern Big Sur. And this is from a population near Cambria where the flowers can get deeply wine colored. There's actually a winery there that features them as a local interest. And these flowers in this population are highly variable. So in the same population, you'll have white flowers beside pink flowers beside dark red flowers. But very pretty, a beautiful variation of Calochortus albus. This is Albus var rubellus. All right, so the star tulips and the pussy ears are all small Calochortus. They tend to have fairly few flowers on the plants, and all of them tend to feature various degrees of hairiness inside the flower. So this is Calochortus uniflorus. This grows near and around the Bay Area and is very closely related to Calochortus umbellatus, which grows in Oakland and at Mount Tam and other places in the Bay Area as well. And any given population of these can sometimes be hard to key out to either one. There's probably a good bit of hybridization between them as well. This is a seed pod of Calochortus uniflorus. So the flowers are upright, as I showed there, but the seed pods tend to be downturned and they open up, and the seeds basically don't scatter very far when they fall out of the seed pod. Over in Point Reyes, in March and April, you can find the delightful Calochortus tolmii. It is a beautiful little purple taxon with a density of hairs all over its petals, just really wonderful. This picture doesn't quite do it justice. They can be much more purple than this. This one's a little bit washed out because of the lighting, but a beautiful little taxon. And there are tens of thousands of these near along the Abbott's Lagoon Trail. This is Calochortus ceruleus. So what's interesting about Calochortus ceruleus is even though it seems to be very similar to the Calochortus tolmii that we see here, it is not very closely related. So it is in a different group of Calochortus altogether, but it seems to have converged on a very similar structure, these very fuzzy petals. Calochortus splendens, which I mentioned earlier about its distribution, beautiful little pink taxon with a variable inside. Some flowers are congested with long white hairs and others are much more open. It has led some people to speculate that it might be two different species, but my experience has been that you find a mixture of these features all across the different populations, so probably just the same species with variability. Calochortus splendens again. And another Calochortus splendens. As I mentioned, some have wondered if this might be a different species. They proposed it as Davidsonianus, but as I mentioned, this species is mixed with the other forms across its range. Calochortus clavatus is a large yellow taxon. There are 5 different subspecies of Calochortus clavatus, and a particularly interesting one up in the Sierra Nevada is one of the largest taxon, an isolated population. Somehow it got into the ponderosa pines in the Sierra and is very successful there. Give me just one moment. All right. So this is Calochortus avius, that large species that grows in the Sierra. And these particular plants are quite large. This flower is about 3.5 inches across, and it was on top of a plant that was about 4 feet tall. And this is another of the Calochortus clavatus variants. This is the Clavatus clavatus. Beautiful flower. That purple pollen is quite striking, and the name clavatus comes from the hairs inside the flowers here, which are club-shaped. You can see they have a little bulge at the end of each of them. And this is Clavatus recurvifolius. I showed a picture of that earlier. It's a dwarf form that grows near the ocean. Very short, very colorful. Excuse me, I have a bit of a catch in my throat. All right. All right, and this is a close-up. Earlier, I showed you a picture of Calochortus obispoensis. And so here's a close-up of the flower. It's a very distinctive Calochortus. It's lost most of its petals. It still has, of course, Calochortus have 3 petals. It still has 3 petals, but it's lost most of each of them. They're very, very reduced. They are practically, and in most cases, smaller than the tepals, and they are covered in these long hairs. So the flowers look as much like a tangle of hairs as they do like a collection of petals. Beautiful little taxon. This is Calochortus weedii from Southern California. It extends from the LA area all the way down into Baja. It is a widely distributed genus. It tends to come in, yellows and brownish colors, but certain populations can be quite striking. This one has a beautiful rim, a rust-colored rim. This is a population down near Julian, east of San Diego. And here's some pictures of Calochortus weedii intermedius. So the taxon, the weedii species that sort of blend together slowly with a species called plumberi, which we'll see in a moment, are called var intermedius. And so they add a mix of pinks and purples into the color scheme. And then this is plumberi, beautiful, often pink taxon, one of the most common of the Calochortus in Southern California. You can find this pretty widely from the Santa Monica Mountains to Bakersfield. You can find it up in the Transverse Range as well. And in some populations, this pink can become very deep and rich. And I've seen pictures of solid, deeply solid pink flowers as well. I've never gotten pictures of those myself, but I've seen pictures of them. And then this is the intriguing and delightful Calochortus tiburonensis. Tiburonensis is a real enigma in the Calochortus. The old taxonomy of Calochortus that were based on flower shape and bulb characteristics grouped this species with Southern California species, with Obispoensis, which we saw earlier, and some of the other ones in Southern California. So it's definitely an outlier and an exotic taxon. But genetics has seemed to completely contradict that theory, and it seems that Calochortus is most closely related to Calochortus tiburonensis is most closely related to umbellatus, which grows quite close to it on Ring Mountain. Ironically, this Calochortus is an upward-facing flower with a vertical seed pod, and its closest relative seems to be umbellatus, which has a an upward-facing flower, but with a downward-facing seed pod, and is a much smaller taxon that tends to grow in moist areas, whereas tiburonensis grows only at the top of the hill and amongst a boulder field. So definitely an interesting taxon. Hyperendemic, only grows in Tiburon, has never been discovered anywhere else. Probably never grew anywhere else, though perhaps some of the serpentine exposures in San Francisco that used to exist might have harbored it. It wasn't discovered until the late 1970s and the early 1980s. In fact, delightfully, on the walk I gave last weekend, a former roommate of the discoverer of the taxon, Alan Hill, discovered Calochortus tiburonensis, and a woman who was on the walk had lived with him in college and after college during the time he was making that discovery. So she popped in, had never seen it in the wild before. All right, and then Calochortus fimbriatus, I showed pictures of this earlier as well. This is my favorite taxon. It grows in Central California and in Southern Big Sur. It has also lots of color variation and just a beautiful fimbriate taxon, beautiful purples and reds and oranges all mixed together. All right, so the Mariposa lilies are all upward-facing tulip chalice-like flowers. There are many of them. It's the most common form in the Calochortus. Calochortus leclinii grows up in the mountains in the Sierra and in the Great Basin. This is the very rare Calochortus dunni, which grows down in Southern California. I have seen it only in the mountains east of San Diego. This is Calochortus luteus. It grows, it's widely distributed in the state. This is a coastal population down near San Simeon, but this also grows in the Bay Area. It's probably one of the most common Calochortus that you can find here. And there are some populations close by that, are tens of thousands of plants, and you can, see a whole hillside full of these in bloom at the right time in the spring. This is a paler variation of that Calochortus luteus in a large population. Luteus often grows with a variety of purple taxons, so you have this wonderful contrast of the yellow and the purple in the right circumstances. Jake Sigg sent this out in his newsletter announcing the talk and labeled this as the spot as a population here in San Francisco. This picture is not from that population. This is from down near Pinnacles, but still a beautiful population and very similar to the same form that grows in San Francisco as well. Calochortus palmeri is a somewhat unusual species. It grows in wet areas frequently, so you find it in seeps and springs. Most Calochortus tend to seem to be specialized for drier spots, but several taxa do like wetter areas, and palmeri is one of those. This is Calochortus simulans, an interesting little taxon from down in San Luis Obispo County, and it's pretty much only in San Luis Obispo County. I think it is endemic to that county. And here is what I had previously labeled Calochortus superbus, but just the other day, I need to update my slides. Just the other day, I established this is in fact Calochortus vestae rather than Calochortus superbus. So beautiful Calochortus vestae. This is near Lake Berryessa. Also a vestae. And also a vestae. Here's Calochortus invenustus. That was the alpine taxa I mentioned. And this is from the population that's east of the Bay Area. This is a serpentine outcrop south of Livermore along Mines Road. It is often a pink or purple or pale white taxon where it grows and is usually no taller than this. A 10-inch plant is a tall invenustus. Frequently they're 4 inches taller or even shorter. It is, however, still a gorgeous taxon, and when you get close, you can see that beautiful purple pollen and those wonderful yellow hairs. A purpler example of invenustus. So the most vibrant and captivating of the Calochortus, in one color at least, are Calochortus kennedii. This taxon is fairly widely distributed. It grows in California and all the way out towards New Mexico as well. It has fairly large seeds that are probably capable of some wind dispersal, so that probably explains part of its wide distribution. It's a desert taxon. You tend to only find it in places that qualify as desert or very close to desert. These pictures are at Mount Pinos, so they're in a ponderosa pine woodland right at the edge of the desert, in the mountains at the edge of the desert. Beautiful dark orange. There is another variation of this that's bright yellow. So in Arizona, you'll find yellow populations as well. The picture does a decent job of giving off the vibrancy of this color, but in the landscape, these just glow. They glow out, as if they were like traffic cones or something. Just really, really vibrant, really, really sumptuous. This is a shot of one growing in my yard. This is a very difficult taxon to grow, and this is the one time I've had it bloom over several years. But beautiful, sumptuous, glowing, all the many descriptors. All right, and then, as I mentioned, Kennedy might be the nicest for the oranges, but Calochortus venustus is an amazing, dazzling taxon. So it's widely distributed in the state. In most cases, when you find it, it's a mostly white flower with a couple of blotches and some color in its throat. The populations can be quite large and quite dense with flowers in good years. And there is definitely color variation. In most populations, you'll find flowers that tend towards a little bit of yellow or tend towards a little bit of pink. And as you go south from the Bay Area, and especially as you hit the Southern Sierra foothills, the Transverse Range foothills, and the foothills extending as far as the Carrizo Plain east of San Luis Obispo, the colors become deeper and deeper, and the white flowers can become more and more replaced by more colorful flowers. You'll find every variation of pinks and golds and oranges and purples. Sometimes, plants side by side will have flowers of different colors. Just beautiful variation. This is a population at Mount Pinos with probably the widest variation of color that you can find. Beautiful patterns and striations and mixes, just wonderful. Every flower is prettier than the last. You can spend a whole day walking around looking at every flower. Deep purples as well. And then some of the flowers have this amazing velvety color texture. I'm not exactly sure what gives it this effect, but like they sort of swallow the light. So you have this wonderful like dark. This is a red that is extremely bright, but at the same time looks almost black. It's a beautiful, beautiful flower. All right, and there are many other taxon that I have not visited in person. We will rely on the Pacific Bulb Society for pictures. These are some of the Mexican taxa. They sort of break all the rules. They have lots of nodding flowers with mixes of characteristics that you usually see in upright flowers. Um, let's see. The beautiful coxeye. So there's a large center of diversity, Calochortus in Southern California and in Southern Oregon and far Northern California. There's a large area of serpentine exposures up there in the Siskiyou Mountains and in the Southern Oregon mountains as well. And there are many interesting species there. So Calochortus coxeye is one of those. Beautiful flower. Beautiful, hairy little flower in woodland conditions growing on serpentine, as many Calochortus do. The beautiful Calochortus nuttallii grows out in the Great Basin. Beautiful variation. You can find this in whites and pinks and oranges and golds. The sago lily is the common name for this one. And Calochortus greeneye grows in Northern California and is a very distinctively shaped taxon. It has these brightly colored and very prominent tepals underneath the petals. This is another of the taxon that has wind dispersal. It's probably evolved for wind dispersal, and its seeds are larger and capable of being carried by the wind. All right. So Calochortus are definitely beautiful. I have found them extremely easy to grow, at least all of the ones that I've collected, which is most of the ones that are native to California. So in my experience, all of the ones that I've worked with are winter growing taxa. So they tend to put out foliage during the winter and they bloom in the early spring, sometimes in the later spring or early summer. But by the end of the summer, all of the plants have gone, almost all of the taxa have gone dormant again. Their leaves are dead and they are resting in the ground as bulbs. So that means that I tend to try to mimic that when I'm growing them. So when I collect seed, I will wait until the fall and winter to sow that seed, and then I will water it as soon as the first rains start, and then keep them uniformly moist all rainy season long. If we have a good rainy year, then you may not need to water the pots at all. If it's a somewhat drier year, then you'll probably want to keep them supplemented with water. And warm temperatures will trigger their dormancy in the springtime or in the late summer. So the plants will tend to know when they want to go dormant. So you can water them until you start to see the seedlings die back on their own, and then you can stop watering them until the fall again. I keep the pots in the shade during the summer of their first and second years or so, and then after that, the bulbs are usually big enough that I can plant them wherever in pots or in the ground, and they tend to do fine. So pots do work quite well. I have grown many species to blooming size in pots, but what I can say is it's difficult to get an exuberant bloom of plants in a pot. It can happen, but it won't last more than 1 year. The plants feed pretty heavily in the soil that they grow in. So I found that growing them in the ground is the best way to get good bloom year after year. Um, Calochortus like to dig. They have contractile roots. Many geophytes have contractile roots, so their roots pull the bulbs deeper into the ground. In addition to that, Calochortus each year rejuvenates. So in the ground, you don't see it happening, but the bulb from last year is consumed in growing the plant of this year, and then this year's plant grows a new bulb for next year. So as these new bulbs, the old bulb shrivels and the new bulb grows, it will grow deeper into the ground. They'll grow as deep as they go, as they want to go. They sort of have some kind of way of deciding that they're deep enough, and so they will stop digging. And that's usually, that can be anywhere from 4 or 5 inches down to, 10 or 12 inches down or even deeper. Out in the desert, Calochortus cannedii can be a foot or more underneath the ground. All of the Calochortus like good substrate drainage. Even the ones that grow in wet areas tend to grow in rocky, wet areas. So they're not a plant of thick, rich mud, even in the places where they like moisture. Um, in my experience, Calochortus definitely appreciate nutrients. Fertilizer is definitely good for them, and it will encourage them to bloom. And even though many Calochortus do specialize on exotic substrates like serpentine, you don't require that. In fact, it's probably the case that they're on the serpentine not because they prefer it, but because they are merely better competitors on serpentine than in other places. Especially with the introduction of European grasses all across California, the Calochortus probably have had to give up some habitats they used to have to those grasses, and now we find them in places where they can be comparatively more successful. So I grow Calochortus in my yard, my front yard. My front yard is a succulent garden, so I don't water it very frequently, but I do water it about every 2 weeks during the summer. So if there hasn't been natural rainfall, I will water. And so about every 2 weeks. So I water between, maybe 5 to 7 or 8 times a year. Um, but that is every 2 weeks during the summer. And then, of course, all winter and spring, they get rain. So these Calochortus are experiencing a good bit of environmental moisture. My yard is extremely well draining substrate, but the plants are comparatively very well watered. And more interesting than that, I would say, in the wild, when I visited Calochortus populations, many times the Calochortus that I find are in places where the soil can be damp well into the spring and summer, sometimes even into the late summer. And then in those places, also monsoonal flows can happen as well. So I'm suspicious that we find Calochortus today in drier habitats because that's where they've been able to survive. And I think it's likely that human alteration of the landscape, building our houses and our farms and on all the best land, has probably pushed Calochortus out of places where they would experience more summer water, where they would be more robust plants. But they're just excluded from those habitats now. So, yeah, so I think, for instance, ridgetop populations, many times you find Calochortus and rocky outcrops at the tops of hills. My suspicion is that that may be because those places catch moisture more so than other places. The rocky substrate is probably also a defense against rodents. Calochortus are edible both to rodents and to humans. Um, Certain Calochortus, like Calochortus luteus, can be common enough in the landscape that they probably could have been a food source for Native Americans, but many of the other taxa probably weren't frequently used by Native Americans because they're not as prolific as some of the other allium onion relatives that are native to California. All right, well, I went through that pretty quickly. We could have had questions anytime. Hopefully, people understood that, but now is time for questions. Um, And that's
Great.
it for my presentation.
Um, Fantastic.
Wonderful. Yeah, wow, that was a lot of eye candy there. Had no idea there was that much diversity.
Yeah, and this is just a sampling. This is not exhaustive of all of the taxa. And so I can certainly talk more about them. These are all of the pictures and images that I shared in the talk. So if we'd like to return to any of the taxa or if anybody's got questions, feel free.
There are a list of questions. Would you like for us to read them to you, or you want
Let's
to
see.
put them in the chat?
Yeah, they appeared in the chat, so I'll bring up the chat now. I wasn't paying attention to it during the show, but I can look at it now. All right. Okay. What is a clay? Um, all right, so let's see here. Yeah, the Central Mexico dispersal is definitely interesting. Oh, a clade. Aha, I see. Yes, a clade. All right, yeah. So yeah, clade is a bit of a technical terminology in taxonomy, but yeah, it's just a lineage of related organisms. Um, So yeah, certainly there are lots of things in the Calochortus. In my own cultivation, I find that various caterpillars certainly like to eat them as well. Aphids are not unknown on them. In the wild, I don't tend to see a lot of herbivory by arthropods on Calochortus. There don't seem to be like caterpillars, large caterpillars or anything else that specialize on them. Certainly herbivores, probably rodents, and definitely deer like to eat Calochortus. You're often in competition with deer at Calochortus sites to get to the flowers before the deer eat the buds in the springtime. The fuzziness in Calochortus is a question about what is the point of the fuzziness in Calochortus. So that seems to be an adaptation to the wind. So windy habitats may encourage fuzziness in the flowers, and that may be to conserve moisture in the flowers. You know, producing a flower for a plant is an expensive endeavor. The plant is losing moisture at the flower when it's doing that, so that may be one of the things that causes them to be fuzzy on the inside. It may also be to help pollen remain in the flower and able to coat the pollinators that visit the flower. Most calochorus are not wind pollinated, so they do want to be able to drop their pollen onto a pollinator who will carry it to another flower. So if you wanted to go one place to see the greatest variety, San Luis Obispo County is a great place to go. I was just there a couple of weeks ago and saw almost nine species. We saw about 7 species that day. It was a bit of a dry year, so some of the populations we had hoped to see were not out. And that's certainly one of the things about finding Calochortus in the wild is it definitely depends on the rain that year, and some years can be surprising. There are microclimates all across California, and so this year, for instance, interior places were very meager for Calochortus, but places within about 5 or 10 miles of the coast were full of Calochortus. It was a very good year, just a few miles from the coast in terms of rainfall, apparently. Mount Pinos it depends on what you want to see there. So if you want to see the beautiful Calochortus venustus that I showed, those tend to bloom in later June and July. But there are other taxa that bloom there at different times. So even later than that, you can find Invenustus at the top of the mountain. Earlier in the springtime, you can find Palmeri close to Mount Pinos as well. As far as the taste goes, Calochortus probably tastes like onions. I have not served any to myself before, but their closeness to the larger onion tribe makes me think they're probably oniony, if I had to guess. Their smell from like when I've been repotting bulbs and damaged them is somewhat oniony, so that makes me think they're probably somewhat allium-like. All right, so a good paper to look at is Patterson and Givnish, and let me bring up. And there's a new one actually as well. So let me get that real quick. Hold on, I'll find the. All right, so one of the paper that I featured in my talk that showed the family groupings from my talk was Patterson Givnish from 2012, I think. Oh, let me see. But I do have a brand new paper that is actually very interesting that I just got a hold of, and that one is Karimi Krieg. Let me write it in here. In fact, I will. Well, here. This is the name of the paper, and I'll paste in the name of the paper and the authors into the chat, and you can look for it online. All right. That is the latest wide sampling of the taxon with genetic analysis to derive phylogeny. I will say it's got some very interesting results, and that may be an artifact of one of the ways they plotted the family tree of the Calochortus. So I would say take this with an asterisk, though that asterisk is the most comprehensive paper with the largest taxon sampling so far. So it's probably an interesting paper, even if it might not be completely correct. All right. Let's see here.
So there's some Q&A questions as well.
Okay,
And
so
and while
I'm going through the chat, so I'll get to
oh,
those in just a moment.
okay,
If
great.
that's okay, yeah. So species that work best in the South Bay. For me in Berkeley, I haven't found the location of plants for the most part to be an issue. I grow Southern California, Northern California, and Bay Area species all together, and they all seem to do quite well. The South Bay, Calochortus luteus is native to the South Bay and the grasslands. You can find Calochortus albus in chaparral and in the woodland areas. Calochortus clavatus grows in the extremely dry eastern South Bay. So there's some definitely options there. Calochortus venustus and argilosus are also native all around the Bay Area and probably grow well there as well. And those luteus and argilosus and venustus are some of the easier ones to get in commercial native plant cultivation as well. Yeah, and definitely somebody mentioned some butterflies landing on them. Yeah, so I don't have pictures of about butterflies. They tend to be a little more wary, so they fly away if I approach a flower with my camera. But definitely butterflies like the Calochortus as well. Yeah, and so there's another mention here for a talk and a walk, talks and walks perhaps by Dee Himes, and she has a great presentation similar to my own. She's gone around and I think found all of the Calochortus native to California and North America more widely, and so she's got a great presentation for that. All right. Okay, and now the Q&A. Do I have access to that Q&A or is that someplace else?
It's at the bottom, but we
Should
could
be in
read
the
it.
toolbar.
Okay, I see it. I see it now. Okay, there we go. I brought it up. Okay, so fertilizer. Fertilizer, you can use any kind of fertilizer. A dilute, I have just a regular like Miracle Grow kind of broad blooming and fruiting fertilizer, and a dilute version of that with each watering is totally fine. Um, Calochortus are active feeders when they're in growth, so I don't know that it would be particularly easy to over fertilize them, but I tend to have dilute, like half or quarter strength fertilizer with each water if I'm growing stuff in pots and I'm, trying to keep it happy and blooming well. Calochortus luteus and Calochortus weedii are very easy to distinguish. Take a look at them online. They're geographically very widely distributed. Calochortus luteus does not grow close to Calochortus weedii in the wild. And they are much different in size as well. Luteus tends to be a taxon that's 12 inches or less. Weedii tends to be a taxon that's 2 feet high or higher. Its flowers are much more congested with small hairs and whiskers all along the petals. And luteus is only really hairy down in the bottom. There's lots of other differences. If you take a look at the two taxa online, I think you'll be able to pick out the differences pretty easily. Now, Venustus and Vestae are more challenging. Venustus and Vestae don't have a lot of overlap in their distribution, so you generally can tell if it's Venustus or Vestae where you are if you're seeing them in the wild. There are specific differences. I can pull out my Calochortus book and we can talk about the gland shape, which is the area that produces nectar on each petal. Those often have a distinctive shape. But for Venustus and Vestae, the shape is not extremely different. And so for those taxon, it's probably more geographic that would help you to distinguish that. They are also very highly variable. So Vestae and Venustus are probably two of the more variable taxon. You can find them in every color from, white with a tiny bit of color at the bottom of the petals to deep purples and reds with, splotches of color all over. They're very variable, very gorgeous, and like many Calochortus, difficult to distinguish in the wild. So Calochortus seed, seed can last, 5 to 7 years. You can still get germination off of seed. Beyond that, I would be skeptical. I tend to plant seed in the first or second year after I get it. And I have very good germination as far as that goes. One thing to watch for with Calochortus is damping off. So they are very sensitive, especially in like wet rain years, to damping off. So I plant my Calochortus with attention to not planting them too densely in a pot. If you go out and collect seed, and people will collect seed, I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't collect seed, but you should certainly be conscientious about seed collecting. Calochortus can be rare in habitat. There are places where they're very common, and seed collecting isn't a problem. But always be conscientious and aware of the fact that you're not the only person out there collecting seed, and that many taxon do depend on good years with good seed to create a seed bank and to create a population bank of young seedlings. But when you do collect seed, don't take very much. Frequently you can snap off a seed pod. You don't need to take the whole thing home because often there are dozens of seeds inside there. And I would say for most growing, 20 seeds is as much as you're going to need because for me, they're very successful and I usually get 100% germination. All right. You can definitely contact me. And I love to take people around to visit Calochortus and habitat in various places. So my info should be around, but I'll put in my email address in the chat. All right. Um, all right, let's see. How long can seeds be saved? Okay, I already answered that one. Yeah, so the slides I believe are all, I'll check. I think they're already on my own website. Let me let me figure that out. I can't look at it on this computer to confirm that, but I can certainly post it. And if you email me, I can help you with that as well. But I also make it available so that they can add it to the newsletter or to the calendar invite on the website as well. All right. And the Cannellii being hard to get to bloom, they're just a desert taxon. So I grow mine outside in the front yard here in Berkeley. Berkeley can be dry, but it is certainly not a desert. And so I think that's probably one of the main challenges is that most people who try to grow Cannellii um, are growing it in non-desert conditions. All right, so all right. Oh, I see. Okay, hold on. Let me send. Sorry, the chat has defaulted to me sending a message only to the host and not to everyone. Okay, so that one's out to everyone now. And let me also repaste that reference to the paper that I mentioned to everyone. All right. All right. Any other questions? I think I've covered them all. If I haven't covered your question, please repost it to either room. I was trying to catch them all.
Wow, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with us here, Kip. That was really a wonderful slideshow. Mm.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's a delightful treasure hunt to go around the state. You can find Calochortus in every corner of the state. So yeah, it's a wonderful experience to go around looking for them and bringing pictures back to show people. And
You-
again, Calochortus are surprisingly easy to grow. So if you have space, pots are not impossible. I know people who grow them on their decks and on their windowsills. But certainly yards all over San Francisco and the rest of the Bay Area can grow them. So,
Cool.
yeah.
And can you recommend is there a field guide that you use, or are you just are you keying it out using the Jepson? How are you getting them to species?
Yeah, so there is a book, the Calochortus by Garrettson and Parsons. That's a great book. It has good descriptions of all the taxa. So it doesn't have a dichotomous key, but each of the descriptions will give you the criteria you want to distinguish it. I do use Jepson. Um, I will warn everyone who's interested in Calochortus that the CalFlora, CalPhotos, and iNaturalist observations cannot always be trusted. There's a lot of confusion, especially when it comes to the Bay Area taxa like Argilosis and Venustus and Vestae and Superbus. There's lots of conflicting pictures and lots of conflicting IDs and lots of just flat out incorrect IDs you can see from the photo. So definitely if you find taxa or if you are trying to like put together some references for that, just be conscientious or aware of the fact that there is a lot of misidentification. And so it's best to always get out the descriptions and key them out if you can.
Great, that's great advice. And thanks again for sharing all that beauty with us, man. That was really a joy to watch.
All right, yeah, quite welcome. And yeah, so feel free. Oh, also, anybody who's interested, I do have Calochortus growing in my front yard here in Berkeley, and there's about 6 or 7 species in bloom right now. The Southern California taxa start blooming about now and bloom through the later summer, and so those are I have a lot of those in my yard. There are some of the prettiest ones. So it's a yard that's on Ashby Avenue in Berkeley. It's the front yard, so you can come by anytime to take a look. 1515 Ashby.
Thank you. That's very generous of you. We'll
Thank
try, we'll
you.
swing by.
All right. Well, thank you all.
Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you, and have
Have a
a
good
have a
one.
great evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. Adios.
Bye.
Bye.